Welcome back to Build with AI. Today we're talking to Andrew, who built Distl. Distl is a product that allows you to capture pulses or weekly updates on any topic you like.
Think of Google Alerts with the power of LLMs layered into it.
It uses AI to grab information from relevant news sources, summarizes it, and emails it to you.
It was a little bit of a test. Can I do this?
Andrew has over 1,200 users and over 180,000 pulses that he's sent.
The more kinds of perspectives you can bring to the LLM, product perspective, design perspective, technical, and so on, the better the output.
This is a really cool application of AI, and I'm excited to show you behind the scenes how Andrew shipped a brand new feature.
Really incremental atomic steps is how I like to work.
I'm Colin, a health tech PM and chronic side hustler turned solopreneur. I've built SaaS apps that have made $0, hundreds of dollars, and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm excited to bring you stories of folks in product, design, and engineering who've done the same.
I have a full-time job, so I'm not able to dedicate all my time to it. So it's fun.
Excited to jump in. When you're ready, I'll see you in there.
Background, I've been in tech a long time, basically my whole career, 15 years in tech. In school, I was kind of studying computer science as well as more sort of design-oriented things, like computer programming, and then what we called human-computer interaction at the time is now UX design.
Yeah.
And then out of school, started a startup, ran that for a few years, super fun, turned it into a SaaS offering after my co-founder had to take off, and then ended up finding a buyer for the SaaS offering in DC. And at that point, my career really started, and I started in engineering, joined a small startup, employee 10, it grew to 70. That was a wild ride. And then we ended up getting bought by a larger company. And throughout that journey, I transitioned from engineer into UX designer. I was kind of the first designer actually at the company because it was super small, helped build out that design program. And then that role sort of naturally shifted into product management as the company grew because we didn't need PMs when we were 15, 20 people, right. But as we grew, we did. So it was kind of a nice, very organic path from engineering into product for me. And that's where I've been since. I like product. It's cool because you get to kind of think a little bit about everything. And depending on the skill sets of the team that you're working with, kind of flex whatever muscles need to be flexed while giving the team enough space and focus to execute. So that's kind of the short version of my career. And since then, I've bounced around from a few startups and mostly focused on growth-oriented roles, so like growing the business. And, when LLMs hit the scene, I got really excited just like everyone else. And I've been playing around with them nonstop. It's pretty much a daily thing for me. It's impossible to keep up with all the releases. But so back in Thanksgiving of last year, so Thanksgiving of 2024, during that break from work, I sat down and I was like, I'm going to solve a problem for myself. So as a content creator, one of the problems I have is I need stuff to talk about. Relatively easy to do if you want to scour the web for an hour every day and find interesting articles. But I wanted kind of an automated solution for that. And so I got to work building out what I was thinking of as a tool at the time that could do that web scouring for me,
right?
Find interesting articles that are related to my interest, which is mostly AI and tech, summarize them, and then send me a few bullet points. So I could kind of wake up in the morning, open my email, and have this executive summary of hey, Andrew, here's all the things happening in your space that you might want to make a post about on TikTok. And I shopped that around a little bit on TikTok. I was doing kind of a build in public campaign. And there was enough interest that I decided to go ahead and release it as a SaaS offering. And from Thanksgiving to Christmas, over 1,000 people joined the product. I monetized it real quick. And it was a really fun launch for me, a lot of excitement. I've incrementally added to the product and it's grown incrementally since then. Yeah, the interesting part is I didn't write any code for that product. I strictly prompted the LLMs to write the code for me using Cursor. And so it was a little bit of a test, can I do this? And the answer is yes. It's very possible.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I feel like you're kind of a trifecta in some ways because I'm certainly lacking on the design side. That's probably one of my biggest weaknesses. And honestly, growth isn't that easy either. Like that's a whole other kind of can of worms. So I feel like you have maybe it's whatever the fourth version is. I don't know what comes after trifecta, but yeah, you kind of have like a great background for this type of work, right? Where you're shipping stuff on your own and you going through like, the design work, engineering work, understanding the product space, the problems to be solved, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks. I think, as I was reflecting on the product's called Distill, by the way, as I was reflecting on the build process for Distill, and I wrote up an article about it, it occurred to me that I'm particularly excited about this stuff because I think the more kinds of perspectives you can bring to the LLM, whether that's like a product perspective, design perspective, technical, and so on, the better the output. Because it's like, these models are trained on the entirety of human knowledge to a certain
Right.
extent, the entirety of the internet. So I feel like really what we should be doing is trying to just replicate the way that humans normally work and talk to the models that way, because that's actually how they're trained, right? That's what they're expecting. So a generalist skill set, I think, can do pretty well in this context.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, why don't you talk a little bit more about Distill and then maybe show us a quick demo?
Yeah, so the way I set it up is it's a React front end, Node Express back end. It's all on Heroku. I'm using Cloudflare for DNS and Stripe for payments. It's a fairly simple product. I use Perplexity predominantly to source content. And so it basically works on a daily job. So you can, I don't know if you've ever used Google Alerts. Is that a familiar product to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Google Alerts is really cool. It's been around for like, I don't know, 15 years or something. I've used it off and on throughout, my career. And it does a good job of like sending you keyword matches for new content on the internet. So if you think of Google Alerts with like the power of LLMs layered into it, that's kind of what Distill is actually. So instead of finding keyword matches, it finds content on the internet that was posted in the last day that's semantically related, right? You can do that super easily now with LLMs. You don't have to like build out all this NLP
Right.
layering and pipeline and all this extra Python stuff that is not my expertise, right? I can just like ask the model, hey, find stuff that's related to, new product launches in AI. And it doesn't have to use those keywords to find it. So let me open up the product and I'll show you. Okay, so this is Distill. Be the most informed person in the room, where you keep a pulse on literally any topic that you can think of. And this is how it works. So you create a pulse on any topic. Distill finds new web pages every day. And then it uses the magic of LLMs to read, summarize, and email you key takeaways. This is a live running list of real pulses that real users have generated recently. So some of the topics are like quite lengthy. You can see sort of the variety and approaches that people take. This is a longer topic than average. And then this one is interesting because the user's actually combining a combination of topics using quotations. I actually wouldn't recommend using Distill that way. I find that it degrades the quality a little bit, but it's a fairly flexible tool, and people have found some interesting ways of using it. This is a very high level topic, just the word branding. I actually like this one a bit more. Contemporary, ARM-Perex Tech, Hong Kong. So I'm not familiar with ARM-Perex Tech, but this seems to me like a bit more nice in terms of balancing specificity and broadness in your topic, because what you want is something that's specific enough to get what you're actually looking for, but broad enough to where there's probably updates on a daily basis. So I'll flip over to my account. In it, I can see all of my pulses that I'm subscribed to, and users can come in here and create their own. I made this podcast about AI Pulse as you and I were talking about this episode, Colin, coming up. So each pulse, I can either flip it on or off, and I can set the frequency, either get it daily at 7 a.m. Eastern or weekly on Mondays. And I'll read a few examples. So developments in AT Proto, the AT protocol. I was talking with another creator on TikTok who's like really, really interested in this right now. So I told him, hey, I'll follow along and I want to see kind of what's going on in that space. Robotics markets and investments. This is a sector that I'm particularly drawn to right now. I have kind of a thesis, I guess, that robotics will probably be the next like big wave after AI. I think AI is really unlocking that market. Under custom pulses, I've also offered a whole list of popular pulses that are predefined. So I didn't create, well, technically I created these, but a user wouldn't create these. These are already available to users. And this is based on popular topics that I was seeing people request in the data. And so I just wanted to create a bunch of examples of things that people could follow and offer it that way. There's also a feed here. So I can see all of my past pulses organized by date. It just goes on and on and on. There's tons and tons of content here. It's also kind of interesting to think about the data mining that I could be doing on this page, because everyone's pulses are in my database. So I have like a timeline of all of these topics if I wanted to do some analysis there. And I can filter down to a particular podcast. If I want to look at what's been going on in technopolitics over the past few days, I can do that too. There's a few settings. Probably won't cover these. They're not super interesting for this talk. But so what ends up happening is every day I get an email that looks like this. So this is my daily digest from 2 hours ago, and I've got 3 pulses loaded up: Technopolitics, the AT Proto, and then upcoming IPOs. So the way it works is it grabs 3 of the big stories: rising concerns over digital authoritarianism in the US. Interesting. Like, I want to read about that. Geopolitical, technology race, and tech sovereignty. Tech sovereignty is really kind of a cool topic happening right now. You're going to see all these countries like building up their own data centers and their own like AI solutions because everyone's worried about being dependent on each other's stuff.
Yeah.
So importantly, there's citations. And this is absolutely critical in this sort of like LLM driven context, right? I have to be able to click into the article and confirm it is what it says it is. So I'll look at this one as well. Alternative visions for the internet. So phys.org. It's cool for me too, because I get to learn about sources I've never heard of before. Phys.org. Never seen this website in my life. But it's a whole source of content. But that's basically how it works. I get 3 topics with sub bullet points on each one that I want every single day.
Nice. You also get to avoid the ads, which is pretty good.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great feature. Cool. Yeah, I mean, this is amazing. Obviously, like a kind of fully featured product at this point. You mentioned you had, I think, at least 1,000 or maybe a couple thousand users who are using this. Is that right?
Yeah, let me double check the numbers. I got it pulled up in another tab here. Just over 1,300 trials. And a trial is, if I go to the homepage, if you fill this out, you get a trial. You get a 5-day trial. Users, I've had just over 1,200. That's like full-blown signups. And then total pulses that have been created is like 180,000 total.
Wow, yeah.
The scale is interesting for me as a solo builder running this thing completely on my own. And you know, I have a full-time job, so I'm not able to dedicate all my time to it. So it's like, it's fun. It's fun for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great project. Honestly, yeah, there's a couple of things like I also follow, and it's very tedious, especially if like you're following the AI space.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a bunch of subtopics as well, but like if you're really interested in like AI code gen, it changes so quickly, right? That it's almost impossible to keep up. So like a daily pulse on AI code gen would be super useful for me.
Yeah, and it's gotten to the point where like, if you were to create an account here, you'd probably want like 2 or 3 pulses on AI code gen to be like ultra specific. Like, what's Cursor doing? What's Windsurf doing? Like, yeah. It's just like so crazy.
And the news cycle is so fast now, right? On those topics, it's like every day there's something. But cool, yeah. I mean, this is obviously an amazing product.
Thanks, man.
It seems like, you know, production ready, all that good stuff. I'm very curious about how you built it. I wonder if you could share a little bit about like the tools you're using to build it. You mentioned you didn't write any code, so that's super cool. Yeah, maybe we'll like see a demo of you shipping a feature as well once we get there.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up another visual if that's cool.
Yeah, go for it.
So I like this one because it's funny you mentioned how fast everything's moving. This visual is actually a little bit outdated, but it was accurate at the time of writing this, which was like February of 2025. What I'm trying to capture here is I think these workflows make the most sense when you're kind of combining a variety of tools. So this is me in the bottom right on my laptop, predominantly prompting within the context of Cursor directly. So like in Cursor, I'm probably using one of Anthropic's models or just like whatever Cursor picks as their like auto select, their model auto select dropdown. Like that's fine for me for the most part. It's like most of the time that's what I'm doing is like small changes directly within Cursor. About 15% of the time, I'll enlist another model, usually like GPT-4o, and basically ask it, hey, can you be my senior architect, my technical thought partner, and help me think through like, how do I even approach building out this feature? Here's what I want to do, blah, 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 blah. And it'll spit out a bunch of stuff and I can kind of critique it and it can critique me and we work together to arrive at a technical approach. That can also happen within the context of Cursor, but it doesn't have to. And then that's for like, mid to large features. And then this 5% of the time, I'll use like something way more advanced, like a thinking model, O1, O3, whatever the latest is. And that's usually if like I'm starting a brand new project or if it's like a really complicated feature. Like I want to do a bunch of changes all at once, like fundamentally change the architecture of my product, which I had to do once or twice to make this thing work. And so I'll usually work with 4o to think through, okay, what are my high level requirements? How should I think about this at a high level? And then I'll have it create a prompt that I kick over to O1 or a thinking model to basically spit out a bunch of dev tickets for me. And then I start popping those into Cursor one at a time. That's been a pretty consistent workflow for me. Like some of this changes, sometimes I'm more rigid with it, sometimes I'm more flexible with it. Again, most of the time it's just me and Cursor back and forth making small changes. But every now and then, like I think you do got to enlist like the big guns.
Yeah.
Bring in a thinking model.
Yeah. Do you tend to have like a pretty structured approach that like you create tickets ahead of time always, or is it mostly like you said, kind of you going back and forth on, like whatever changes you think are relevant right now, and you really just plan that initial step, like, kicking off a new project, you have a bunch of tickets that you're going to work through?
It depends on what I want to do. So if I'm like, I know that I want to build a net new feature that's like kind of complicated, has front end changes, back end changes, hits the database, whatever. I'll probably go through that like GPT-4o, maybe even O1 cycle. And I'll want to like make sure I've got my plan in place. Or like, here's the dev tickets, and AI has helped me create these dev tickets. I've reviewed them. I have a general idea of, incrementally what sort of code is going to be generated at each step. And that like high level makes sense to me. Most of the time I'm not doing that. Most of the time it's like small changes,
Right.
Like, which is what I'll show you here in a little bit, where I can just kind of pop into Cursor. And I know that it's, this change is only happening on the front end. It's relatively low risk. There's not like big architectural changes that are happening. I probably don't need the model to understand more than like 1, maybe 2 files to write the necessary code. If it needs to understand like 4, 5, 6 files, then I'm probably writing those tickets ahead of time.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, a demo would be awesome. If you have like a small feature you're can ship, then we can kind of see this end to end.
All right, let's build a really super simple update on Distl. So on the left hand, I've got Distl loaded up in localhost. It's running locally. On the right hand side is Cursor. And if people aren't familiar with Cursor, it's really similar to like VS Code or any sort of traditional code editor. The big difference is this right-hand window right here that's opening and closing. This is like your AI window. So I get access to models right here, and there's 3 modes. There's an agent, ask, and a manual mode. That's the core innovation of Cursor. But I think what I want to do here is, so I'm looking at my custom pulses on the left-hand side. And in my demo environment, I've got, what is 8? About 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pulses. And they're ordered just by created at date. So I just want to make a little sort for them so that users can have a better way of like reviewing their pulses and making changes if they want. And so you can see here, some say weekly, some say daily, some say disabled. And so one of the sorts I want to add is order by frequency. So I want to group all the daily ones together, weeklies, and then the disableds together. So you can kind of quickly see, what are you actually getting when? And then maybe I'll just add like a sort by alphabetical as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is look for where is this UI in the code base. So I'm just going to search across my code base for some text, like this text, enable up to 10 custom pulses. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to be able to tell the model, like load up the right file for the model so that it has the right context. And so that snippet of text happens to be in this file called pulse.js, which is on the front end. Sounds about right. And then I like to just kind of orient myself usually to the code just in case there's like something I want to call out at the code level specifically. So what I'm noticing is here's the add button that maps to this guy. And then there's a list component here that maps to this list. And so I know that I want the sort to live in between those two. So I can like maybe reference that in the prompt, like have it be in between the add button box and the list that holds pulse topics or something. I think for the demo, what I'll do is I'll sort of demo like using the model to help me create a ticket that I then send over to the agent. So usually I would do this for more complicated features, but I think it's just kind of a cool workflow to demo.
Yeah. One thing I'll try and chime in here with before you get is I feel like you're already at a level of specificity that most people are not, if that makes sense, where like you're trying to identify which files need to change. You're looking at the existing code to understand what's happening. You're going to create, to some degree, like a spec or a ticket that's in context to what you already know. And then presumably you hand that off to the agent where it's like a very high quality prompt. It's not just like add filters or add sorting, right? So did you come by that approach like organically? Is this something you read? Like why do you do it this way?
I'm really glad you're asking that. So I'll pull this visual up. Here's my thing. Context, specificity, and scope. These are like 3 really critical things to be thinking about when it comes to prompt quality. And so my belief, and I've seen this proved out over and over again, you want high context, high specificity, and narrow scope. So you want to increase your context. And by context, I literally mean like for the context window, like what files are you telling cursor to read through? And you want to be like really, really specific. So rather than just saying add filters in a sort, I'm going to specify like which filters, which sorts, and so on.
Right.
And the scope, like I'm just going to do one thing. I'm not going to like be like add filters and also a new tier that people can buy that is more complex. And like, obviously that's crazy, but like really incremental atomic steps is how I like to work. I get much better results that way.
Yeah, very, very similar to what I've been doing, but I'll let you continue on here.
Nice. Yeah. Also curious to hear if you see stuff that's a little different than your approach, like shout it out. I want to learn. Okay. So I'm in ask mode. I'm loading up the pulse file, pulse.js file as context, because I know that's the file. And I'm just going to write something real quick. So I want to add filters. So these are organize their custom pulses in these 3 ways. Created at will be the default. That's already the default. Frequency, daily, weekly, disabled, alphabetical. I want there to be a button group that lets the user select which sort they want and label the button group as sort by. Place the button group between, and I'll say under add button and above the list of custom pulses. So for a feature like this might be enough to just kick over to the agent because it is pretty simple. But for the purpose of the demo, what I'm going to do next is ask the model to write me like a much more in-depth ticket just to kind of demo that.
Do you find that specifying where the ticket goes makes a difference? I'm just curious. Like saying it goes into cursor agent here.
I don't know. I haven't experimented with that variable. I do like to tell it that the ticket is going to be consumed like by an LLM, like a code generating LLM. I don't know that saying like cursor specifically matters, but my thinking there is like, okay, the model then knows that the final audience that's consuming its output is another model.
Right.
And to me, that must matter on some level, right?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So another thing I like to do when I'm like building out a bunch of tickets is include these things. And this is where I'm like not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm trying to basically just stick with how the industry works because that's what the model's trained on. So here's a visual reference. I like to have user stories. I'm going to skip business goals, design details, technical direction. I also like to specify no need to include code snippets because it likes to do more work than it needs. Just general technical direction. And then QA steps. So my thinking here is like, this is both for the model to get a variety of context, but it's also for me to be able to like much more effectively review the ticket that I'm about to paste into the agent. Because like that's how I understand stuff. And I think people should basically adopt that mentality of like, how are you going to evaluate the ticket that you're giving the model to write code against? That's what you want in the ticket. So these are all things that I'm familiar with, having been in tech a long time. So I just want to see that stuff in there. So it's going to generate like this really, really thorough, much more thorough ticket than I would have normally written just on my own.
That's quick, eh?
Yeah, that's super
It's
fast.
crazy
Let's
fast.
see,
Yeah.
what model is this on? This is Claude 4 Sonnet.
Yeah.
And so typically I'll just like read this and make sure it looks sane. Or like scan it at least. It's cool because like in the design details, usually I get stuff like this, material UI. I guess I did mention button group, but you get real specific when you use this workflow, which helps a lot because it leaves less up for chance. Like basically, the more specific and detailed you are to the agent, like it just follows instructions. If you don't tell it where to put the buttons or what buttons to use, it's gonna guess, and you might like it, you might not. So.
Right. Yeah, I've actually been thinking about making this visual lately because I have to explain this idea a lot to people at like the non-deterministic nature, where like you kind of have like this area at the top, which is like the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
And then like the tiny circle at the bottom, which is the outcome you want. and like you have to basically get from the realm of possibility to this tiny circle. And the way
That's
you do
great.
that is by being more specific. And if you're not, like there's all these other circles that you could end up at where the LLM is deciding what the level of specificity is.
Yes.
And pointing to one of those other things, right? Because you're not the one doing it, but it's still happening.
I can't wait to see that visual. Send it to me. I'll blast it to my audience.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot because it is a weird idea. Like people are very unused to working with non-deterministic systems.
Yes.
But I think it's really critical, to be honest.
This looks fine. I'm going to copy this and paste it into a new chat. The reason I'm doing a new chat is because what I found is when I when I switch over to agent mode within this chat, like maybe this is a bug in Cursor, I'm not sure. It gets confused and it thinks I'm still wanting a dev ticket as the output instead of like the actual code.
Right.
And so if I just open a new chat, it doesn't have that history. Okay, so new chat, pulse.js is still the like file context. That's the only file that is going to be edited. And then there's usually like some stuff on the footer or header I need to delete, like this.
Yeah.
I'm just going to like delete that blank because that could potentially confuse the model. All right, so Markdown's fine, by the way, like for anyone wondering, like I paste Markdown into the agent all the time. It's actually really good. All right, so let's kick this off. And then it's just going to do its normal thing where it starts tinkering away and making code changes. There's the button group.
Yeah, it's pretty fast, eh? What a world we live in now.
I know. Gosh.
Yeah. Have you played with any of the background agents or not so much?
Oh my gosh. I'm glad you asked that. I was actually just about to mention I joined like an AI coding talk at work yesterday morning, and one of our developers was demoing his background agent workflow. And I was like, holy crap, like I have not kept up with that feature. This is so cool.
Yeah.
Like how new is that? Maybe I'm just out of the loop or something.
It's like, I think in the popular context, like I think background agents have existed for a while. I mean, what are they called? Devin was the first one, right? Devin's been around for a bit, but like other products also picking up the same workflow. It's probably been a month, maybe 3 weeks.
Okay.
So
I'm not too far behind.
Yeah, not
I need to make a pulse on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's just for folks listening. You can make very kind of small targeted changes. I wouldn't say it's like as broad as something you could do in Cursor, kind of going back and forth, because you spin up basically an agent from some request, and then it goes off and does the work and comes back with the code. So you can't interact with it, which means that you have to be like hyper specific with what you want, because it's going to come back and there's no interruption or interactivity. But yeah, basically you could theoretically spin up like 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 Cursor instances with individual small changes, and they go off and do the work and come back. And you also have to be a little bit familiar with like pull requests, because otherwise like you're making changes to the same code base and that can get messy. So there's like some kind of prerequisite knowledge in order to have the tools be useful. But it's a super cool paradigm just in general, like a way of working.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's so cool. Get someone on your pod to go over that. I wanna watch that episode. Sure. Okay, so usually what I'll do is I might read through, like if it's a really complicated thing and the code changes are going to be confusing for me, like I'll usually read all of this output, like word by word, like literally just try to understand it. This one's pretty simple, so I'm not actually going to read that super close. Instead, I'll just pop over here and see if it works. And it works. Yes.
There you go.
That's awesome. So created it is the default. That's just what it normally was. Frequency, it's got grouped by daily, then weekly, then disabled, and then alphabetical works. One thing that I didn't ask it to build is like to preserve this state. If I were to refresh the page, for example, I bet it's not going to stay on. Yeah. So it goes back to created it. And that's fine. Like I didn't ask for that, but the way that I would approach that, if I were to like add on, is I'd probably go back into chat mode and be like, hey, it's not preserving the selected sort. How would I go about doing that? And it's probably going to be like, we'll store it, in the browser somewhere as like a cookie or like a session variable or something. It'll make some recommendation, and then I'll, choose one of those and then go from there. What I highly do recommend is, minimize this, is just like browsing through the code changes. If your technical background allows you to like look at this and quickly understand it, then absolutely review it. If not, then just like read it. And this is a good learning opportunity, because you can also just, either be Googling on the side or have another chat window open with a model and like asking it to explain stuff. That's also what's happening in this window, by the way, is it's sort of explaining. And so I like to go through here and just sort of review it, see if it makes sense to me. I like that it adds comments. That's helpful. And it also helps me keep up with like how the product is evolving. I'll bring up a slide. I think this is really important. So like you have to be able to understand the changes and maintain it and evolve it over time. And the way that you do that is by like reviewing the code and generally grokking what's happening. I think one of the big challenges that we see over and over again with this type of tooling is like people will come into their tool of choice, lovable, cursor, whatever, have the model make a ton of changes, and then they just focus on the output. Like, does it work in the UI? If
Right.
yes, move forward. If not, try again. You got to keep up with the code, at least at an architectural level. Like, even if you don't know the syntax super well, like you got to know, oh, changes were made to this file. That's where this stuff lives. And like, here's how it all kind of fits together. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing that's interesting and honestly exciting about the space is there's so many people now who are interested in coding who were not before. Because I feel like they can ship stuff, right? And they don't need to go and like spend 4 years getting a computer science degree first. I think the downside though is that like there is kind of a lack of knowledge or skill around even like the architecture side. I'd agree that's kind of like the bare minimum. And when I say architecture, I don't mean like client server database. I mean like inside of your React application that you have some type of state management system, right?
Yes.
And you're pushing state from your components into there and you're pulling it back, and like architecture within the client or within the server, within the database, or like you mentioned,
Yes.
you have a job system, so cron jobs,
Yes.
or like all that stuff. Just being familiar that those things like exist and how to reason through them goes such a long way, especially like with debugging, right? I think that's one of the highest value ways to like use that knowledge, because if there's a problem, like I click the button, it doesn't do what I expect it to do, I can start to go through in my head like, oh, okay, like it's this problem or this problem or this problem. Like these are the realm of possibilities, right?
Right.
Versus someone who's entirely dependent on AI. You click the button, it doesn't work, and then you ask, why didn't the button work? And like hopefully eventually you get to the right answer, but you never know, right? So I agree, like the technical fluency is, I think, only becoming more useful. It was useful before, but I think it's more useful now because you have these tools that can help you, but you do have to have some knowledge.
Yeah. I think if you'll let me, I'll bring up one more visual.
Yeah, go for it.
To your point, Colin, I completely agree. And like the way that I've framed, so this workflow I was calling prompt-driven development when I wrote that article. Vibe coding has since taken hold. There's going to be a bunch of names for it. The name doesn't matter so much. But the way I've framed prompt-driven development to people in the past is like, if you're going to work this way, if you're on the less technical side of the spectrum, it's a really good way to learn fast. But you're probably going to wind up in some tricky spots, like trying to debug, or it's going to get too complex, or figuring out how to get onto production and accept payments and all that stuff. Those are going to be like barriers you got to jump over. If you're on the more technical side, it's a great way to ship fast. So like wherever you are on this spectrum, I think it's really, really a valuable way to be working and building, because I learn stuff all the time from the model as it like writes code. I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that function or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Cool. And then I just had one other kind of question, because I'm curious. A lot of people have problems with tools like Lovable or Replit. So let's say like the non-engineering focused tools, more like consumer focused, where the tools overwrite stuff that they built previously. Right. So like you've spent a bunch of time, you made a thing, and then all of a sudden it's like deleted half your code or just overwrote it. The models get lazy, as you know, so sometimes like they partially implement stuff. So like, they've lost a lot of their work. Obviously there's version control systems, but even still, like it can be difficult to trust like let's say a Lovable or a Replit if it's making those types of changes and it's overwriting stuff, that it's not going to do that again in the future. If you're running a project like this one where you have users and customers and revenue, obviously like that's not something you want, where it's just like delete your stuff.
Yeah, can't have that.
Like, is it just that Cursor doesn't do that? Do you have specific strategies to avoid that? Like, because that's one of the most common problems.
Yeah. So I made the decision pretty early on in my own journey to like pick a tool and stick with it. And so I picked Cursor, and I've stuck with Cursor. And the reason that I picked it is because it was clear to me that of all of the like code generating tools out there, it's the one that's like designed for engineers. primarily. And so I felt that that was going to be the safest, most reliable way to harness AI in a more predictable manner, because it presents diffs of code, right? Like you can just review it and it's very similar to the existing workflows. What you're describing scared me about some of the other tools. And I think they have, made a lot of headway to resolve those concerns. I just haven't spent as much time in those tools because I really want to understand at the code level what's going on, because I need to have a maintainable product that I can evolve over time and not get into a spot where I need to hire someone out to like help me understand what the heck's going on.
Right.
And so, yeah, to me, like the code interface was the most important.
Yeah. I actually don't know if it's the tools themselves, like to give them some credit, because everyone's using Sonnet 4 behind the scenes. Or it's just
it's all the same stuff. They're all wrappers, right, to a certain extent.
Yeah. It might just be the prompting. Like the level of time and care that you took for this prompt, I think people are going to see is like probably 99th percentile as compared to what they're doing, right? Because most folks are just writing in to the text box like, it doesn't work, fix it. I want this button to go here, add Stripe payments. Like, these very like general prompts where like as someone who's worked in technology, that there's a bit of stuff behind the scenes and, having a level of specificity is better. But
yeah, I think, I know we're coming up on time, but my thoughts there is like, and you mentioned it earlier, an architectural understanding is the absolute most important thing. So that example of add Stripe payments, there's probably 5 totally fine ways of doing that. Maybe a dozen, depending on how your application works. What's your business model? Are you charging a subscription? Are you charging by transaction? Like, there's so many ways of thinking about that. And like having clarity at an architectural level gives you the language to describe to the model what you really want. And that's what people need.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Yeah. So just to wrap up, what's next for you? And then also like with Distl, and then, where can people find you online?
Yeah. So next with Distl, incrementally rolling out features. The space is changing so much. I'm getting a ton of value out of the product still. So just keep, still growing it. I'm building a bunch of other stuff on the side too, like kind of more like content creation, newsletter oriented stuff. So you'll probably see more products coming out from me. And you can find me online at Andrew Ships. So TikTok and Substack are my primary channels these days. LinkedIn's fine too. I'm on there. But Andrew Ships.
I guess one last question before we wrap up. How did you get your 1,000 users? Because that's usually the most common problem that once they figure out the first part.
TikTok.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, TikTok. So I've been really fortunate to grow, for me, like a pretty sizable audience on TikTok. I had literally like my first video about Distl went really, really viral and just tons of people signed up. That's a funny story, actually. My monthly bill was like quickly growing to like $600-700 a month.
Yeah.
Like watching all these accounts come in, and I was working long nights for like a week trying to figure out what the heck am I going to do? I gotta like kind of lock this thing down so I'm not going to break the bank, but I don't want to cut people off. And I had to build out all this extra stuff because it was breaking. My Heroku servers went down. Like it was fun.
Yeah. That sounds like a nightmare probably for some people, but like that's what it's like, right? When you ship something probably for the first time, like when you expose it to the world for the first time, there's a bunch of cases you didn't know about, and stuff starts to fall apart.
It was a war zone in my home office.
Right. Yeah. Well, like I said, Andrew, I appreciate you having on. I think this was a really cool example, and looking forward to seeing what else we ship.